It's the International Soccer Preview, and we are Soccer Files Canada. Welcome to Series 28, looking at the groups and teams of the 2024 Copa America. This episode is looking at Group C, USA, Uruguay, Panama, and Bolivia. Here we go! It's the International Soccer Preview by Soccer Files Canada, Series 28. I'm Kevin.
And I'm Connor, and today we are looking at Group C for the Copa America 2024 tournament. This group is made up of the United States, Uruguay, Panama, and Bolivia.
Yeah, we're currently focused on the 2024 Euro Cup and Copa America. Both of those played in June 2024. So we're producing this groups and teams series as well as a player series for each of the teams. There are two parts to this media cast.
Yeah, so in part one, we will give a summary of each team's Copa America and World Cup histories. And we'll also take a bit of a closer look at their recent history and form, including how they qualified for this tournament for those that needed to do so.
Right, and in part two, we'll look at the teams in comparison to each other, looking at their rankings, head-to-head history, and their chances of success. So we'll end with a discussion of their prospects and our predictions.
All right, well, let's get started.
Okay, well, what are you wearing, Connor?
I'm wearing a Canada jersey.
Okay, well, I believe that's off topic. I, on the other hand, am wearing a Panama jersey.
Nice. I guess in either case, we're going to enrage our American listeners, but that's not the point.
No, I'm not enraging. I do have a USA shirt, and I probably should wear it because Canada just got an American coach. But I'm kind of pulling for the underdog, and I think the Panama shirt is a bit more rare and thus unique, making this podcast or media cast more valuable.
All right. Well, it is a unique one. And a nice shirt, too.
It is a nice shirt. Okay, here we go. We'll start with a look at USA's broader history in soccer. So they actually have a bit of a World Cup or a bit of a Copa America history there as well. But USA has a much longer soccer tradition than most would guess. Few people realize that they not only entered the first World Cup in 1930, but won third place there. They qualified in 1934 and 1950 also, famously beating England in the latter, but they were knocked out at the group stage in both. The only cup they failed to participate in was in 1938 when they withdrew. However, they all but disappeared from the soccer scene after 1950, not even entering the early editions of their regional cup. But they came roaring back in around 1990 to rival Mexico as the top team in the region. They also battled their way into respectability at the World Cup, looking feeble in a couple of campaigns in the 1990s, but passing the group stage 5 out of 7 times from 2002 onward, with their best finish in 2002, reaching the quarterfinals. I was at that very game, Connor.
In South Korea.
Yeah. And their worst result, a failure to qualify in 2018. In the Gold Cup, it has been first or second place since 2005, with the exception of a fourth place finish. And I'm just going to add that they've been involved in 4 Copa Americas, and twice they have won fourth place in that tournament.
Yeah, very respectable.
Right. Can you give us some of the recent history?
Yeah, so the USA have suffered a bit of a decline in recent years. Their failure to qualify for the 2018 World Cup might be seen as errant, except they were unconvincing in 2022 qualifying also, with a particularly poor road record. Their 2019 and 2021 Gold Cup wins do argue their continuing strength in the region, but the tournaments are now hosted at home where they are strong. So this, and the fact that the region is generally weaker than average, leaves some doubt with regard to their true strength at the world level. They did pass the group stage of the 2022 World Cup, but did not look like a world-class team. This will be tested when they are the main host for the 2026 World Cup, and they go into the period with more talent than they did in the previous decade, specifically with more players plying their trade in Europe. But recent Gold Cups have shown some difficulty in organizing their large pool of talent into a cohesive unit. Their B team struggling with the region's second-tier teams in the 2023 Gold Cup and failing to reach the finals.
Yeah, right. So this tournament, in a way, is good for them because it's more of an international tournament, if not quite a world stage.
Yeah, I think it will be a good benchmark, as it is for really all the, I guess, the CONCACAF teams in particular, who don't kind of play the caliber of teams that are in South America as regular a basis.
Right. Okay, well, let's take a closer look at their recent history, just the recent tournaments, and we'll begin with the World Cup 2022. In the summary there, you said they had a weak campaign, so prove it.
Well, they were one of 5 teams to questionably receive a bye to the final round in qualifying, in a system that I guess was blatantly unfair before COVID and caused some changes to improve it somewhat. As I mentioned, they were strong at home, only suffering a draw with group winners Canada. But they bested Mexico, but their weak road record and specifically a loss to Costa Rica in the final game saw them finish behind Mexico for 3rd of 8 in the group stage. Their poor road record also included ties in El Salvador and Jamaica and a loss in Panama. They actually finished tied with Costa Rica for that 3rd place spot. And had the tie-breaking criteria been head-to-head, they would have finished 4th and been forced into an intercontinental playoff. In the tournament, in the World Cup itself, they tied Wales, then England, but a 1-0 win over Iran in their final game saw them finish 2nd in the group stage. They then lost to the Netherlands 3-1 in the round of 16.
Right, so they did well in the final result. That's a pretty standard finish for them, but a bit of a weaker path than they would have hoped for. Do you agree?
I do, and weaker than it's been, prior to 2018 when they were qualifying comfortably, and even in the World Cup, they did well in the group stage, but it was pretty close with Iran. Iran, I felt, were a bit flat in that final game against the USA. Or they easily could have found themselves out of the group stage.
Yeah, and that England-USA game is one of the worst of the cups.
Yeah, 0-0.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next tournament that they were part of. That's the 2023 Gold Cup.
Yeah, so they qualified through the 2022-23 Nations League. They were grouped with El Salvador and Grenada. And actually, they only dropped points in El Salvador, but it was a rough game where they scored on a last-minute header. But in general, it was a weak group where they qualified with very little trouble, other than that game. At the Gold Cup, they topped the group with Jamaica, Trinidad, and St. Kitts, finishing level on points with Jamaica, who they tied, but a head-on goal difference after 6-0 poundings of the Caribbean nations. In the quarterfinal, they had a dramatic game with Canada. It finished 1-1 in regular time, 2-2 in extra time before they won in penalties. And then in the semifinal, they met Panama, where the match again went to penalties, but Panama were victorious. So the U.S. was out at the semifinal stage.
Yeah, that one also saw 2 goals in extra time.
That's right.
Wow, pretty exciting. I believe that was their B team playing that tournament.
Yeah, they didn't send some of their strongest, and I guess it showed with a bit of the struggles. I mean, they beat St. Kitts and Trinidad, but actually failed to win a game outside of that.
Yeah,
tying,
exactly.
Jamaica, Canada.
Yeah, in regulation time. Yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the CONCACAF Nations League becoming kind of a more important thing in the region. So we'll go back to the 2022-23, even though you did cover the group stage of that.
Yeah, so they topped the group over El Salvador and Grenada, as I mentioned. And then they were off to the Final Four, the Nations League finals. And here they performed very well. They beat Mexico 3-0. That's quite a convincing result, before meeting and beating Canada 2-0 in the final.
Right, so they're A team playing that game, and always a bit more convincing, at least at the regional level. Let's move on to the next one then, the 2023-24 CONCACAF Nations League.
Yeah, so they received a bye to the final round, which was I guess a quarterfinal, and it was a two-legged matchup to decide who goes to the Copa America. And the U.S. met Trinidad. They won 3-0 in the first game, but actually lost the away game 2-1. So they went through on aggregate, but they probably wouldn't have been pleased to lose that match in Trinidad.
Yeah, definitely looking very weak on the road, struggling even with some of the second-tier teams in the region. Trinidad and Tobago, almost a third-tier team.
Yeah. And then
that brought them to the Final Four then.
Yeah, of the Nations League. And they beat Jamaica after extra time 3-1, again tying them, though after 90 minutes, before meeting Mexico in the final, and they won 2-0. So it was a defense of their Nations League crown.
Right, 2 in a row there, and struggling a bit with the Caribbean teams there.
In fact, the Jamaica game, they scored, it was a 96-minute own goal by Jamaica that brought the USA level. So
good Lord.
Quite a close match.
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, as you said, that quarterfinal there was the qualifying procedure for the Cup for this tournament, so we'll return to it. We are showing World Cup qualifying. It's well underway for the South American teams, but for the CONCACAF team, the main round begins in early June of 2024. So those games actually before the Copa America.
Yeah,
but however, I don't think America's involved in that round.
Yeah, so nothing to speak of so far.
Yeah, nothing to speak of so far, but we will just kind of review how they got to this tournament.
Yeah, and that was through their matchup against Trinidad, which we spoke of, which they won 4-2 on aggregate, winning at home, losing on the road, but having enough to qualify.
Right, so that Nations League quarterfinal stage doubling as the process for this tournament. Trinidad and Tobago did go on to a further playoff, whereas USA qualified automatically. And that brings us to the end of our look at the USA. Let's move on to our second team, Uruguay. And I'll give a broader history, and then Connor will take us through their recent history. Okay, so Uruguay have had amazing success. Do you know the population of Uruguay, Connor?
I think it's around 3 million.
Yeah, 3.5 million.
Wow.
So that's a stunning success for a country that size. They have a record that's the envy of most big countries. They have 2 World Cup titles and 3 fourth-place finishes besides. And they also have 15 Copa America titles, as many as Argentina, or actually Argentina may be one ahead with their recent title, but more regional titles than Brazil. Though stronger in the early years, their 2 World Cup titles coming in 1930 and 1950, the duration of their strength is also impressive. They have had low periods, but have never missed more than 2 World Cups in a row, and always seem to return with a team capable of passing the group stage in the World Cup or of winning a regional title. 3 times they have come out of a lull to pass 2 or more World Cup group stages in a row. That was in the late 60s and the late 80s and from 2010. That recent strong period peaked with a 4th place finish in the 2010 World Cup and a Copa America title in 2011. But with that crop of players now passing, that doesn't mean dying, it means retiring. They seem to be in another down cycle.
Yeah. So looking at their recent history in a bit more detail, so although the peak in 2011, 2010-2011 is long past, their decline has been slow as they've passed the World Cup group stage twice since, but they were knocked out at the group stage in 2022. And they also continued to pass the group stage in all but 1 Copa America tournament though they haven't reached the semifinals after 2011. The key players of that strong generation are now retired or close to it, and gone is its talisman, manager Oscar Tabarez. They continue to produce talent, though not at the level of the stronger periods.
Do you agree with that?
I do. I mean, some of the players that we've mentioned that you would look at would be, Luis Suarez and Edison Cavani. I mean, good players continue to come up. Darwin Nunez would be one, but it was kind of a very particularly strong generation that took them through the 2010s.
Yeah. That's right. And we will be looking at those players in the player podcast or the player media cast for Uruguay. But let's continue on here and look at their recent tournaments, the Copa America in 2021.
Yeah, so there's no qualification involved. They were involved in a 5-team group stage, and they finished second behind Argentina, who they lost to, but they otherwise tied Chile and then beat Bolivia and Paraguay. They meet Bolivia again here. It was a quarterfinal exit, though, for them. They met Colombia, and that match went 0-0 before Uruguay were dumped out in penalties.
Right. So, yeah, a kind of a power performance for Uruguay at this point. Let's look at the 2022 World Cup finals campaign. For the qualifying, we just put up the final chart there.
Yeah, it's a mammoth 18-game qualification and a 10-team table. But Uruguay finished third. They were well behind Brazil and Argentina, who were first and second, but topped kind of a competitive middle pack ahead of Ecuador, Peru, and Colombia. They did go through a poor spell where they lost 4 in a row near the end of the campaign, but they recovered to win their last 4 matches to qualify for the World Cup.
Great. And how did they do in the World Cup?
They were part of one of the most entertaining groups. They started with a 0-0 draw with South Korea. They then lost to Portugal 2-0. However, they beat Ghana in their final match 2-0. It came down to goal difference with Korea, and Korea scored a dramatic late winner against Portugal to dump Uruguay out. So South Korea and Uruguay were tied on 4 points, 2 back of Portugal, but it actually was an identical goal difference, but Korea scored 4 and conceded 4, whereas Uruguay scored 2 and conceded 2.
Oh, man, that was one of the most entertaining moments of the Cup because they took off not only Luis Suarez, but I think another forward there put on more defensive players to defend that lead. So they seemed really taken by surprise.
Yeah, they weren't expecting Korea to win it, of course.
Yeah. And then in the last moments, dribbled their way into the penalty box and hurled themselves to the ground as soon as they got there, hoping for a penalty.
And we'll mention that Ghana defended valiantly, considering they were already out. All too happy to knock Uruguay out of a tournament with the famous handball incident, knocking Ghana out in 2010.
That's right, Ghana. I'm sure they were rubbing their hands at this opportunity to get revenge on Uruguay, who, as you say, kind of beat them by slightly devious means in 2010. So a great drama there. Okay, let's move on to their World Cup 2026 qualifying campaign, which is a third of the way through. How have they been doing?
They're doing well so far. They've won 4, tied 1, and lost 1. They're currently sitting in second place, but notably they've beaten Brazil at home and Argentina on the road. So that's 2 very difficult games where they've come through, 2-0 victories each. So second place out of 10 so far. They're sitting in a good spot.
Right, that's a glorious result, especially away in Argentina. So they could be duking it out at the top with the big teams there.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we do want to mention qualification for this tournament as well.
Yeah, however, for the South American teams, the 10 of them, it is automatic, so no qualification here.
Right. Okay, that's the end of Uruguay, and we move on to Panama. And I'll take a look at their longer history. From Panama's first entry into regional competition in 1976 and their first World Cup entry in 1978, Panama was a weak Central American team until 2005, qualifying only for the first regional cup when no qualification was required, and for one Gold Cup in 1993. Suddenly, in 2005, they became a strong second-tier team in CONCACAF, not only consistently reaching the Gold Cup, but passing the group stage. A second-place finish in 2005 was glorious, but their strongest period was 2015 to 2018, reaching the semi-final of the Gold Cup 3 times in a row, with another second-place finish in 2015, and reaching their only World Cup in 2018. Several top players retired after that, causing concern that a golden generation was passing.
Yeah, that golden generation argument has some credence when they fell back to quarterfinal finishes in the 2017 and 19 Gold Cups and a group stage exit in 2021. However, a recent resurgence saw a strong 2022 World Cup qualifying campaign, and they also reached the Final Four in the last 2 Nations League seasons and matched the highest achievement of the golden generation with a second place finish in the 2023 World Cup.
So Gold Cup there.
Yes, Gold Cup. A competitive team since 2005 now. Talk of golden generations is actually giving way to the idea that they are simply a strong second-tier team in the region, troubling the top teams as they go.
All right. Let's take a look at their campaigns over the last little while, beginning with the World Cup 2022 campaign, which you said was a strong one.
Yeah, they did have to qualify for the final 8. 5 teams got a bye, but Panama was not one of them. But they comfortably topped the group of kind of some lesser teams and then beat Curacao in a head-to-head playoff. But then in the final 8, they were impressive. They were undefeated at home, even beating Canada in their final match, Canada who topped the group, but also beating the USA 1-0. They did struggle more on the road, picking up 2 wins but losing 5. But it was a competitive finish for them. They ended up finishing 5th out of 8, but only 4 points back of the USA in 3rd. So it wasn't enough for an automatic spot or even a playoff spot, an intercontinental spot, which was taken by Costa Rica. But it was a pretty competitive campaign, and they at times looked close to repeating the success of the 2018 generation.
Yeah, for most of that campaign, they were in 4th place or higher. A bit of, I wouldn't say a lapse by them, more of a strong finish by Costa Rica at the end there. But as you say, very nearly reaching a 2nd World Cup in a row.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to their Gold Cup 2023 performance. Also very good here.
Yeah, they qualified through the Nations League, topping a group with Costa Rica and Martinique. And then at the tournament, they started with a crushing 4-0 victory. Oh, sorry, no, they in the group stage, they beat Costa Rica again and Martinique before tying El Salvador. So topping not the strongest group. But then in the quarterfinal stage, they crushed Qatar 4-0 before beating the USA in penalties. And then in the final, they lost to Mexico. Mexico scored the only goal of the game in the 88th minute. So nearly pushed Mexico all the way. So you have to say a quite sensational tournament for Panama.
Yeah, did you watch any of those games?
I don't recall offhand, but I did watch highlights of most of them.
Yeah, they were really good against Mexico. I mean, as you can see by the scoreline, really pushing Mexico and might have won. Okay, sorry, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot there.
No, that's okay.
Okay, let's take a look at the Nations League. As we say, becoming more important. We have looked at the group stage already, but we're focused, I guess, on the finals here.
Yeah, so having topped the group ahead of Costa Rica and Martinique, they met Canada in the semifinal and lost 2-0. and then lost to Mexico in the third place game, 1-0. So yeah, we're up against kind of the big three in the in CONCACAF, and lost competitive games, I guess you can say.
Yeah, I mean, just being there is really the achievement. Canada too, Canada in a strong phase at this point, but both of them doing well to be in that position in the first place. Let's go on to the following season, 2023-24.
Yeah, so they topped the 16 group at kind of a preliminary stage, ahead of Trinidad and Tobago. And that brought them to the quarterfinals of the Nations League, where they beat Costa Rica, home and away. And I will say they met Costa Rica in the previous Nations League, where they beat them home and away. They beat Costa Rica in the Gold Cup, and then they beat them twice in the Nations League. And Costa Rica have kind of traditionally been the third or fourth team in North America. So Panama are kind of making a strong argument for taking that mantle from them.
Really throwing them around like a rag doll recently.
Yeah. Once again, they got to the final four of the Nations League, and once again, it was a fourth place finish, losing first to Mexico and then Jamaica in the third place match.
Yeah, so again, being in the final four, a good achievement there. So well done, Panama. Let's look at 2026 qualifying, or perhaps you can just tell us what is going on with that.
Yeah, it hasn't started yet. It begins in June. I'm not sure if they're in the early rounds, but no games played.
Yeah, I think so too. Actually, I don't really think I think that's an early stage, and the actual qualification begins after that. Of course, USA, Canada, and Mexico won't need to go through those qualification games anyway. And let's just recall qualification for this Copa America tournament.
Yeah, that was through the 2023-24 Nations League, where they beat Costa Rica home and away, 6-1 on aggregate. So that doubling as qualification for this tournament.
Right. Okay, that brings us to our last team, Bolivia. We'll begin by kind of an overview of their longer history. And sorry, I just have to find my place here. Okay, Bolivia is among the most senior of world teams, having played in the 1926 Copa America and in the 1930 World Cup, the first one. Despite a few gaps in participation in both tournaments after that, they have never failed to enter either competition since 1962. As consistent as their participation is their weakness, though, they can only be said to have had a good period in the mid-90s, qualifying for the World Cup in that decade and passing the group stage in the 1995 Copa America, and then coming second when they hosted the tournament in 1997. Their only other successes are single flashes in the pan, a title win when they hosted the Copa America back in 1963, and reaching the Intercontinental Playoff in the World Cup in 1978 qualifying. Since then, the relative meager achievement of passing the group stage in Copa America 2015 stands out only because they have failed to otherwise do so since 1997. Their highest finish in the Big Ten Team World Cup qualification group, that system having started in 1998, was 7th place in 2002.
Bolivia's good performance in 2015, passing the Copa America group stage, has not been followed up. They've lost all games in their 3 tournaments since. Their relatively strong home form in the thin air of La Paz usually keeps them from finishing at the bottom of the Big Ten team table that is World Cup qualifying. However, they've never won an away game since the qualification system was established in 1998. Really, there is no inkling of strength other than some good home results since 2015.
All right, and we'll kind of show that in the recent record as well, beginning with the Copa America in 2021.
Yeah, so they actually lost all 4 of their games. There was a 5-team group stage and 4 advanced. So Bolivia was the only team that failed to advance, having failed to pick up a single point.
All right, so not much to speak of there. Let's look at their World Cup 2022 qualifying campaign.
Yeah, as we mentioned, they do get some wins at home, especially. They won 4 of their matches, all at home. The most notable being a 3-0 win over Uruguay. But they struggled particularly on the road. They did pick up 2 draws, but lost the 7 other matches and lost 4 at home besides. So it all meant that they finished 9th out of 10. The only achievement, I guess, being 5 points ahead of Venezuela.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's jump to the 2026 World Cup qualifying campaign. Again, we're a third of the way through there.
Yeah, and it's similar to what we'd expect. They've lost all 3 on the road. At home, they were beaten by Argentina and Ecuador, but did manage a win against Peru. They sometimes manage wins against usually other bottom half teams. So 1 win from 6 sees them in 9th out of 10 so far.
Right. Okay, and once again, they do not require any qualification process for the Copa America. It's automatic for South American teams. So that brings us to the end of our look at the teams, and we move on to part 2, when we compare them, and that will start with their pots and rankings.
Yeah, so the pot 1 team is the United States. They are hosts, and I think them and Mexico, along with Argentina and Brazil, were given the pot 1 spots, the top 2 in each region. The pot 2 team is Uruguay, who actually would have been in pot 1 had it strictly been based on world ranking. So the strongest team from pot 2. Panama come from pot 3, and then Bolivia from pot 4. Bolivia being the lowest ranked team in the tournament.
Right. Okay, and you did allude to the rankings there, so let's take a closer look at those.
So the USA is 12th in the FIFA rankings, and 25th in ELO, so much further behind. Uruguay is 11th in FIFA, so just ahead of the United States in the FIFA rankings, but 7th in ELO. So ELO views or puts Uruguay 18 places ahead of the United States. Panama is 45th in FIFA and 29th in ELO, so actually not far behind the States in that ranking system. And then Bolivia is 85th in FIFA and 59th in ELO. So I guess one thing to say here is that usually the systems are relatively close, but there's actually a fair bit of disparity between how the 2 ranking systems look at the teams in this group.
Yeah, I mean, one of them putting USA just slightly ahead of Panama and way behind Uruguay. Which one do you agree with more there?
Often I side with ELO, but I find myself agreeing more with the FIFA rankings in this case. I don't know if USA are right behind Uruguay, but I see they're closer to Uruguay than Panama, is in my view.
Yeah, I agree. And honestly, I don't see why Uruguay would be 7th. I know they did beat Brazil and Argentina recently, but they didn't pass the group stage of the World Cup.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we may come back and use those as a discussion point, but let's move on to our next basis of comparison, the head-to-head records.
Yeah, starting with USA versus Panama. USA has won 14 games, though Panama has won 4, and 4 have been draws.
Yeah, Panama, as we said, kind of challenging the top teams in their recent form. They exchanged wins, as we saw in the 2022 World Cup qualifying, and beat USA in the 2023 Gold Cup semifinal. That was a B team for USA, but it did take place in USA, so they had the hosting advantage. So I don't think we can take anything away from the result.
Yeah.
All right, on to the next one.
Uruguay and USA are the next teams. They've met once. It was a win for Uruguay, but that was a while ago.
Yeah, that was the 1993 Copa America group stage. So these teams have met each other because the USA participated in some of those. Not that relevant at this point. Okay, go ahead.
Uruguay versus Panama is next, and there's nothing to say here as they haven't met before.
Yeah, or not in official competition, which is the only ones we really regard here. Uruguay and Bolivia have certainly met.
Yeah, several times. Uruguay has won 17 of those meetings. Bolivia has won 8, and 6 have been draws.
Right, but again, if the game takes place in Bolivia, they have a much better chance of winning, and they did so in recent World Cup qualifying campaigns.
Next is Panama and Bolivia. They actually have met once, and it was a win for Panama.
Right, it was in the 2016 Copa America Centenario. So a tournament like the one we're about to enter, where some CONCACAF teams and South American teams faced each other. So they happened to meet up there. And maybe this gives us a bit of an indication of the relative strength going into this tournament between the two.
Yeah. And then finally, Bolivia versus the USA. They've also met one time, but it was a win for Bolivia.
Yes, it was in the 1995 Copa America group stage. Ironically, one of the few Copa Americas where Bolivia did well. So USA was a bit of a victim of luck there.
Yeah.
Okay, the last basis of comparison we'll use is what the odds makers say. And do you want to take us through that? These are the odds to advance from the group.
That's right. Only 2 teams will do so. USA are given an 85% chance, Uruguay 93% chance, and then Panama and Bolivia are given a 12.5% chance each. So markedly behind USA and Uruguay.
Right, and so that is a good lead into the discussion. Both the rankings and the odds are seeing USA and Uruguay as quite even, except for the ELO rankings. I think we see it the same way, but do you think Uruguay is slightly stronger?
I do think Uruguay is a slightly stronger team right now. However, this tournament is being played in the USA, which probably erases that narrow edge. So, yeah, it's pretty close to call for me between the two of them. But what do you think? Do you see it's neck and neck, or do you give one team the edge?
Well, the first thing I want to talk about kind of before that is where the USA is going to bring their A team to this tournament. They've kind of disappointed sometimes by bringing their B team to the Gold Cup. And ironically, the reason I think CONCACAF disallowed Mexico and USA from participating in the Copa America was because they were sending their A team to those tournaments and the B team to the CONCACAF regional tournament. But I think CONCACAF is kind of doing it to themselves by having that competition every 2 years. I'm ranting a little bit, but do you think USA is going to bring their A team here?
I think so. But kind of for this age-old problem is that the opportunity to play against some of the South American teams brings a bit of prestige to the tournament. So I think the USA will want to have a really good showing here. So I do think we'll see their A team.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, obviously, last time it was just 6 months after the World Cup, so you can understand the players not wanting to play in tournaments back to back like that. I'd just say this is more prestigious. I hope USA does bring their A team, and I think they will. And given that and the home advantage, we talked in the longer history about Uruguay in a bit of decline. I think they are. I think these numbers really represent maybe Uruguay a few years ago rather than now. USA passed the group stage, albeit unconvincingly, and Uruguay didn't pass the group stage, albeit narrowly. But I do think that's a bit representative of the relative strength of the teams at this point.
We talked about the USA perhaps being a bit of a in decline as well when you look at some of their qualifying and regional results. But do you see that as a decline, or do you see it as just a blip, or perhaps a product of not bringing their best players?
Yeah, it's a really good point because that did come out in the histories as well. I think home advantage may be a bit of an antidote to that. Um, Gee, I had something else to say. Why don't you talk about it, and I'll see if that thought will come back to me.
Yeah, I think I mean the USA does have a large pool of players. I think for them it's been a little bit more the case of failing to bring talent together than a lack of talent. Um, I think we've both been unconvinced at times by their manager and kind of the constant chopping and changing of players. But the talent is there, and I think even in the World Cup, we perhaps kind of were a little bit down on the USA going into that tournament because of their weak qualifying. But when they did have their top players, they did manage to kind of pull it together and advance.
Yeah, that was the thought that I was thinking of, was the whether they would be able to bring together their team this time. And I remember under Jurgen Klinsmann, they were kind of complaining about, or there were complaints about, oh, they don't have enough players playing in Europe, and the quality of the team is less. Now the problem seems almost the opposite, where they have too much talent to choose from. But as you say, they're not really honing them into a single unit. And I think their success here will really depend on how well they can forge those players into a team.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of forging players into a team, Panama is far less talented on paper, but are looking strong as a team. Do you think they have a chance here?
It's probably difficult. I think they've shown that they can be competitive at a game level against Mexico and the USA and Canada, and they have tied games. But they also have at times proven themselves just to be a tier below the top teams, which really USA and Uruguay are. So I think it would be quite a surprise if they got through. I think we were both kind of looking at a golden generation from 2005 to 2018, with the World Cup being their swan song. And there were, to be fair, a lot of players in that World Cup in their 30s who had been there for a long time. But I have been quite amazed at their ability to regenerate and to put in such strong performances in 2022 World Cup qualifying, in the most recent Gold Cup, in their, as you said, ragdolling of Costa Rica recently. So I think Panama, thoughts of decline were a little bit premature, and I think they are proving themselves to be a bit more resilient and competitive than perhaps it looked as that generation retired.
Yeah, I mean, I was expecting them to get back to struggling to get into the final stage of the World Cup, which at the time was a 6-team. It's a bit easier with the 8-team, but now they seem to have taken over, of kind of vying with Canada as the third team in the region. I guess Costa Rica also in that discussion, but one would never have seen Panama there before 2005.
Yeah, I think for them, I don't really see them challenging USA or Uruguay, or at least to get out of the group. But I do give them the edge over Bolivia in that regard. I think, as you said, Bolivia don't have much to speak of since 2015 in terms of achievements, whereas I think Panama have shown that they can be a good team, better than the sum of their parts. And I think finishing ahead of Bolivia would be probably a good result for them.
I kind of feel like you're underrating them there, and perhaps part of my feeling in that is that Uruguay may be overrated. They are, of course, they won those games against Brazil and Argentina, so still always have surprises in the bag. But I wonder the effect of Suarez and Cavani leading. Even though they were a bit aged out in the World Cup, they were still kind of leader of the team. And I don't know if they're going to be here, and what effect either their being here or their not being here will have on them. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, for sure. I mean, those players were huge parts of their success in recent years. and I think any team would miss them. But my feeling is that overall they have enough. I mean, they have players playing on top teams. Federico Valverde of Real Madrid, obviously Darwin Nunez, Rodrigo Bentancur at Tottenham. So they have enough quality, I think, still certainly to not get too bogged down in a match against Panama or Bolivia.
Well, I won't get into insulting Darwin Nunez's inability to find the net, but I do think it's a bit of a transition period for Uruguay, and maybe they'll struggle a little bit in the cup. But I guess we'll just have to wait and see. Again, Uruguay, kind of like Panama, has no right to be where they are in the world record. But they always seem to regenerate and come up with really good players. So you can never count them out. But speaking of counting out, do you see any hope for Bolivia here? I'm personally shocked that Panama and Bolivia are at the same level. I think it's ludicrous. Panama seem a much stronger team.
I certainly agree with you there. I don't give Bolivia the 12.5% chance that the odds makers seem to. I rate Panama as a stronger team for sure. They just, they've lost all their games in their recent Copa Americas, are not good away from home. I don't really give them much hope against either USA or Uruguay. Panama, I mean, that would be the game they look at to try and get something out of. But yeah, I think Panama will have enough to win that game.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting matchup of the strength of CONCACAF versus CONMEBOL. I think a lot of people will give Bolivia maybe more credit than they do, especially their away record. But just because they're from South America and CONCACAF is generally a weaker region, do you think that's a factor?
I think so. I think people look at Bolivia and maybe say, oh, they don't have a good record, but look at the quality of teams they're playing all the time. And maybe there's something to be said for that. So yeah, it is a good matchup. I think, I think maybe Panama and Bolivia will be a good kind of matchup between North and South America, just like USA Uruguay is at the top. Maybe one region will end up winning both games and have a slight claim to dominance or respectability. But I think that's an interesting element of this tournament, is the chance to compare teams from different regions.
Yeah, I think that's really nicely put at the bottom and at the top, a kind of a CONMEBOL versus CONCACAF. It'll be interesting to see how it turns out. I don't really have any details to talk about left, so it is time for me to nail you down and try to get you to finally commit to an idea. Are you ready to make your prediction?
I'm ready as I will be. I'm going to say, if I can, USA and Uruguay tie with 7 points. I think they'll tie each other and win their other 2 games, and they'll go through. But knowing that you will pin me down, I'll give the slight edge to the United States as the home team, and then I think Panama will finish third and Bolivia last.
Okay, well, I may be overstating the case for Panama a bit, but the reason I think I'm wearing their shirt is because I'm really pulling for the underdog here. I actually do think, having watched them play in the Gold Cup, and as you say, it is against a weaker competition in general, but the way they played against Mexico, which I think fits in well, say with a middle to upper South American team, they could have won that game, and they looked very good, and I think that will enable them to challenge Uruguay, who conversely I think will be a bit weaker than people expect. So I'm going to be bold and say USA, Panama, Uruguay, and Bolivia. What do you think of that?
I think that's bold indeed. But we'll see. If it does happen, people will have heard it here first.
Yeah, that's right. I'll look like a genius if I'm right. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of Group C. Actually, we were supposed to be on the discussion graphic as we talked about those things, and now we are for YouTube watchers. Brings us to the end of Group C, so we only have Group D to go. We will be putting out the player media casts soon.
That's right.
All right, good talking to you about this, Connor, and we will meet you again when we look at Group D.
All right, thanks for the discussion.
We would like to thank Paul Udin and Pixabay for the wonderful background music accompanying this media cast. The piece is called Victory Epic Music.